My name is Daniel Moore. I'm 54 years old. I've lived most of my life quietly, working as a civil engineer, saving carefully and never making much noise in the family. I never married, never had children, not for lack of wanting, but because life didn't hand me that card. Still, I built something for myself. A modest home on the land I inherited from my grandfather, a man who taught me that dignity doesn't require witnesses. I took care of my parents as they aged, paid their bills when no one else could, and never once asked for anything in return. But what happened at my father's 80th birthday party changed everything. We were in the middle of the celebration, 60 guests, neighbors, cousins, friends from church. I had just stepped outside for some air when my younger sister, Denise, called me back in. "Dad wants to say something," she grinned. Everyone turned as I walked up. Then my father, without warning, raised his hand and slapped me across the face. So hard the room gasped. "You ungrateful boy," he roared. "You think you'll keep the house just because you live in it? You've got no kids, no legacy. You're a waste." As my cheeks stung and my ears rang, Denise began to clap. She cheered. I heard her voice over the stunned silence. "Finally, give us the house already. He's got no kids. Why should he get everything?" Then my mother, the same woman I'd driven to chemo for 8 months straight, let out a laugh, so sharp it cut through my bones. "He's just a barren waste. Let the ones with real families inherit what matters." I didn't say a word, not one. I stood there with the shame burning through my skin, and every eye on me. People shifted awkwardly. Some looked away. A few offered fake smiles, the kind you give a man when you're too afraid to help him, but too guilty to ignore. My hands stayed at my sides. I turned and walked out. That night I sat in the car for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared out at the darkness and realized something I'd always suspected, but never wanted to face. I wasn't their son anymore. I was just a placeholder until they found someone better, and apparently, in their eyes, that meant Denise, the one who had never once paid a bill, cared for them or stayed longer than a holiday. I didn't sleep that night. But I didn't spiral either. Something inside me clicked, not with anger, but with clarity. If they wanted to erase me, they could try, but they had forgotten one thing. The quiet son sees everything, and the quiet son knows more than he says. That slap might have echoed through the room, but my silence would echo longer. All I had to do was make one quiet call. But first, I needed to remember every detail they'd forgotten I knew. In the days that followed, I said nothing. No confrontation, no texts, no calls, just silence. Denise sent a few smug messages. "No hard feelings, right? And you know it's only fair." But I didn't respond. Not because I was broken, but because she thought I still saw myself as the outsider. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the last 3 decades quietly becoming the backbone of the very life she took for granted. I remembered the mortgage payments I'd made when Dad was about to lose the land. I remembered the trust fund grandfather left, how he made me co-executor after noticing how Denise manipulated him for cash while he lay sick. I remembered the deed, how it had my name on it, because I was the one who took care of the place. I remembered the clause that no one in the family ever really cared to understand, may not be transferred or divided without written consent of the primary resident. That primary resident was me. But more than any of that, I remembered watching, quietly, over years, Denise's credit card debt, her unpaid taxes, her fraudulent loan in Mom's name that I'd bailed her out of to avoid jail time. I had the receipts. I had the bank records. I had the emails. They all assumed my silence was passivity. They never imagined it was protection, not for me but for them. I also remembered every sacrifice, The job offers I declined to stay close to home when Dad's health began to fail. The nights I spent feeding Mom when she was too weak to eat. The times I paid for the utilities while Denise posted vacation photos online. But sacrifices, I've learned, mean little to people who only measure worth by children, inheritance, or applause. After the party, Mum and Dad stopped speaking to me altogether. Denise came by once with her husband, tried to inspect the house, claiming Dad said they should get ready to move in soon. I didn't let them in. I just told her to check with the lawyer. She laughed in my face. Oh, please. You think a piece of paper means anything when the whole family's against you. That's when I knew. They believed they'd won. They thought that slap was the end of my voice. But I wasn't fighting for revenge. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was setting something sacred in motion. Something they couldn't see. The inheritance they lusted after wasn't money, or walls, or titles. It was dignity, and that they had already thrown away. So I called an old friend, a quiet friend, a lawyer. I once helped out of a zoning nightmare 15 years ago. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I said my name, he smiled through the phone. Daniel, he said, tell me what they've done, and how I can help you win. Mark, the lawyer I called, was no stranger to quiet storms. He specialized in estate law and corporate litigation now, but he owed me a favor from years ago. Back then, I helped him save his family's business when the city threatened to bulldoze it. Now, he was more than willing to return the grace. I told him everything, not in bitterness but in truth. He listened, took notes, and then said something that settled deep into my spine. Daniel, you don't need to fight them, you just need to let them walk into their own assumptions. First, we secured the house. The deed was already in my name, but we filed for additional protective provisions, ones that would prevent it from being contested in probate or passed by any claim of emotional duress. We attached all the receipts of my care, payments, medical expenses, and upkeep going back 20 years. Paper doesn't lie, and the law loves paper. Then we dug into the estate. Unbeknownst to Denise, Dad had once opened a joint investment account with me after a stroke scare in 2009. I had contributed to it monthly. He had long forgotten about it. But legally, it was co-owned. The value had grown. Quietly, Mark smiled when he saw the numbers. They're going to assume this was all yours anyway. Let them. The next move wasn't legal, it was strategic. I reached out to a non-profit elder care agency and asked for a formal wellness visit to my parents' home. Not out of malice, but because I knew something they didn't. In their rage, they were beginning to neglect the very people they claimed to love. When the social worker arrived and saw the unfilled prescriptions, the expired food and the tension, a file was opened, a subtle record, nothing aggressive, just observation. I also contacted an old friend from church, Nancy, who now worked with the local housing authority. I invited her to visit me casually. I showed her the renovations I'd done, the living quarters I'd prepared in the back of the property for my parents when they became too frail to live alone. I didn't say anything about the party. I didn't have to. Nancy saw the care in the design, the ramps, the walk-in tub, the emergency cords, all already installed. It was only a matter of time before Denise tried something official. I was ready. Mark made sure every document, payment and legal right was triple copied and sealed. And then I waited, calmly, quietly. I still didn't answer her texts. I still didn't retaliate. The trap wasn't a trick, it was the truth. And truth has a way of setting its own fuse. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was restoring the balance. My family tried to erase me in front of 60 people. But they forgot that quiet men don't shout, they build. It began with a letter. Denise thought she was being clever. She had hired a cheap lawyer, someone probably used to eviction cases, and served me with a notice of familial forfeiture, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage the estate and that, as the rightful heir with children, she should take over the house. It was laughable, but I didn't laugh. I handed the letter to Mark. He read it slowly, smiled once and said, "She just handed us the match." We responded, not with aggression, but with evidence. Mark drafted a calm, measured reply, citing every financial contribution I had made, backed by records, checks, notarized signatures. Then he filed for a protective estate injunction. Denise was about to learn that legal drama is expensive and emotional tantrums are not accepted in court. The next week, she received our response. No shouting, no threat, just 42 pages of irrefutable documentation, her debts, her fraud, her attempts to seize property that was never hers. She went silent after that. Then the fallout began. The elder care agency returned for a second visit to my parents' home, this time unannounced. They found unopened medication, utilities unpaid, and an argument loud enough that the neighbors had to intervene. This triggered a wellness concern report. That report, in turn, prompted a review of my parents' financial guardianship. Guess who had been taking their checks and not paying their bills? Denise, the same sister who cheered when I was slapped. What they thought was a power shift became a spotlight, and when you're standing on lies, the light exposes everything. Denise's husband, who had smugly told me I'd regret hogging the house, was laid off around the same time. Their mortgage went unpaid, and when they tried to borrow against their own property, the bank pulled the credit file and flagged Denise's fraud case from years ago, the one I'd quietly buried to protect her, now unburied. Meanwhile, the social worker assigned to my parents' case contacted me directly. I gave her a tour of the in-law unit behind my home, the one I had renovated for them long before the betrayal. She was stunned. "You planned this?" she asked. "Years ago," I answered, before they chose to forget who I was. Denise tried one last play, a family meeting. She called the same group who had witnessed the slap. "Let's make peace," she said. "Let's be fair." But I didn't attend. I sent Mark in my place with one document, a full legal summary, showing that the house, the trust, and the care plans were now sealed and unchallengeable. Mark stood calmly before them and said, "Daniel wishes you well, but he has no interest in further contact. Please direct all future correspondence to this office." They say silence is weak, but I've learned that silence is patient, and patience, when guided by truth, becomes power. After that meeting, Denise didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. Then the calls began, to my parents, to relatives, to mutual friends, trying to spin a new story. She said I had tricked them all, that I lawyered up and turned everyone against her. But the thing about lies is, once they're exposed in the light, they rot. People stopped responding to her texts. Neighbors who once smiled politely now avoided her driveway. Even Mom and Dad, for all their bitterness, began to pull away. Not out of guilt, but because the house they had mocked was suddenly their only lifeline. My parents' health had declined faster than I expected. They were now too frail to handle Denise's instability. The wellness agency ruled that they needed supervised care. They had 2 choices: move into the facility the state provided, or move into the fully equipped living quarters I had waiting. My mother tried to protest, called it manipulation. My father refused to speak for 2 days. But in the end, survival silences pride. They moved in quietly. I didn't attend the move. I simply arranged for the transport, hired the nurse, and had the guest house ready. Denise didn't take it well. She stood outside the gate, yelling. But no one answered. Not me, not the nurse, not even my parents. She wasn't banned, just ignored. She tried to stage a scene outside the grocery store once, wailing that I'd stolen everything. I just stood there, placed my groceries in the trunk, and drove off. No eye contact, no argument. She looked like a child screaming into the wind. The more noise she made, the more isolated she became. What she didn't realize is that her collapse wasn't due to what I took, but what I stopped holding. For years, I had quietly propped up the image of a family that was already crumbling. I paid debts in the dark. I absorbed insults. I smoothed over chaos, and when I let go, it all fell under its own weight. I wasn't punishing her. I was simply done shielding her from her own consequences. As for my parents, the early months were cold. My father stared past me during meal drop-offs. My mother only responded through the nurse. But over time, something softened. They saw that I didn't gloat. I didn't bring up the slap. I didn't mention the party. I just made sure they had what they needed. That was all. Eventually, my father muttered a quiet thank you one evening as I handed him his medication. My mother cried during a doctor's visit. The silence was heavier than words, but in it was a strange kind of healing. By then, Denise had moved away. Rumor had it she'd filed for bankruptcy. Her husband had left. Her house was up for short sale. She called once, just once, late one evening. I let it ring, not because I hated her, but because I was finally at peace. Months passed, and the house grew quiet again, but not from loneliness, from balance. My days returned to a rhythm I hadn't known in years. Morning walks, soft jazz from the record player. Grandfather left me. Home-cooked meals, no more rushed by errands or guilt-tripped obligations. My parents remained in the guest quarters with round-the-clock care. I visited only when needed. We didn't force conversations, but there was respect now, not born from fear or tradition, but from truth. They saw who had stayed, and more importantly, they saw who had vanished. One autumn evening, my mother asked me if I ever regretted not having children. I looked out the window for a moment, watching the wind dance through the trees. Sometimes, I said, but legacy isn't about blood. It's about how you carry weight when no one sees. It's about choosing peace when revenge is easier. It's about building something no one can take, because it lives inside your choices, not your name. She didn't respond, but I noticed her eyes well up. That was enough. I began donating parts of the land to local community projects, a garden for seniors, a small learning center for foster teens, not for applause. But because I had held on to this place for decades, and it was time to let it breathe beyond my own story. Funny how people begin to remember you once you stop trying to be remembered. Strangers started calling me Mr. Moore, asking for advice on zoning, building permits, land use. I helped quietly, as always. No need for titles. One afternoon, I found a small envelope tucked under my gate. No return address, just a note in familiar handwriting. I was wrong. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope you find joy. Real joy. You've always deserved it. I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer with my grandfather's watch and the deed papers, and let it be. I didn't need to write back. Closure, I've learned, isn't something you get from others. It's something you offer yourself when you stop carrying what broke you and start planting what frees you. Some people dream of revenge that roars. I dreamed of a life that didn't need to. I built it in silence. I guarded it with grace. And in the end, I won. Not because they lost, but because I refused to play their game. I walk through this home now, my home, with no bitterness in my chest. Just air, just stillness, just a man who remembered who he was and acted accordingly, quietly, completely, without ever raising his voice. In the months that followed, people began asking why I never fought back. Not just neighbors, but distant relatives, even a few of the guests who had been there the day I was slapped. They'd speak with an awkward kind of guilt, like they had watched something ugly happen and said nothing. I didn't hold it against them. Most people don't know how to respond to public humiliation unless it's scripted in a movie. Real betrayal doesn't come with a soundtrack, just a pause and silence. What they never understood was that I didn't stay silent because I was afraid. I stayed silent because I had already outgrown the war they were waging. The slap, the cheers, the insults, those were just fireworks trying to hide a dying flame. Denise and my parents had spent so long trying to rewrite the story of my life that they never noticed the pages I'd already published. With every sacrifice, I had built something bigger than their approval. I had built peace. What still stings, not with bitterness, but with truth, is how easy it was for them to cast me aside. One moment of public spectacle and they shed me like dead weight. That tells you everything about how fragile their loyalty was. Love, real love, does not cheer when your face is burning from shame. It does not clap when your character is mocked. And it certainly does not laugh at the wounds of the one who once paid their rent. But even with that sting, I never wished them harm. I just wished they had seen me for who I really was before it was too late. The boy who stayed behind, the man who built quietly, the son who never asked to be owed, just seen. I think part of me always believed that if I worked hard enough, if I was kind enough, they would choose me, that they would finally say, "You matter." They never did, so I had to say it for myself. The funny thing is, I don't need their validation anymore. I don't need a family reunion or an apology in front of a crowd. What I needed was to look in the mirror and say, "You didn't fold, you didn't flinch, you didn't become what they called you." And I can say that now, fully, truthfully, and without hesitation. So no, I didn't win because I destroyed anyone. I won because I stayed intact when they tried to reduce me to nothing. And that's a kind of victory that can't be clapped for, only lived. I've come to believe that legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what continues to breathe in the spaces where your name is no longer spoken. For me, that legacy now lives in the garden, where seniors pick vegetables they planted with their own hands. It lives in the laughter of the teens who gather in the learning center, writing poems and building futures without ever knowing the story behind the land beneath them. Sometimes I walk past them unnoticed, unrecognized, and that's exactly how I like it. The quiet ones don't need spotlights. We just need to know that what we built is still standing, still growing, still doing good. No plaque, no praise, just purpose. I've also learnt that time, when allowed to breathe, softens even the most jagged edges. My father now calls me Daniel, not boy. My mother has begun leaving handwritten notes on the kitchen counter, reminders for her medication. But sometimes little things like "thank you for dinner" or "you were always the strong one." She never says it aloud, but she doesn't have to. Her silence used to be a weapon, now it's a bridge. As for Denise, I haven't heard from her since the letter. I don't expect to, and I've made peace with that. Some people only find clarity through collapse. Others never find it at all. I don't carry her shame anymore. I put it down like an old coat that never fit. My forgiveness is quiet. Not permission to come back, but permission for me to move on. I've started writing again. Nothing fancy, just reflections. Pieces like this, stories I never planned to tell, but needed to, because somewhere out there, someone else has been slapped by the very hands they used to feed. Someone else has been cast out by the people they carried. And maybe they need to hear what I'm saying now. You don't have to fight to win. You just have to outgrow the battle. And if you hold your ground, if you keep building quietly, your life will outshine the applause of your enemies. People used to mistake my silence for weakness. Even I did once. I thought being quiet meant being less bold, less brave, less worthy of attention. But now I understand something deeper. Silence is only weak when it's rooted in fear. When it's rooted in strength, it becomes power, the kind of power that doesn't need to shout because it knows exactly what it's made of. I look back on that moment, the slap, the applause, the humiliation, and I no longer flinch, not because it didn't hurt. It did, but because now that moment has no weight over me. It was the turning point, not the ending. They tried to make it the finish line of my worth, and instead it became the first step in a much larger redemption, the kind of redemption you build in stillness, one steady breath at a time. There's something liberating about having nothing to prove. I no longer enter rooms wondering who respects me or who remembers what I did for them. I know who I am. I know what I've carried, what I've survived, and what I've created. That knowledge walks into the room before I do. That's enough. Sometimes I see old family members around town, the ones who stood there at the party and said nothing. Some try to wave, others avoid my gaze. A few have even approached me to apologize. I don't hold it against them. People freeze when they don't know where to stand. It's not my job to carry their shame, only my own peace. I nod politely, but I don't linger. My life has moved on. So have I. I keep the letter from Denise in a drawer, not because I need it, but because it's a reminder that even those who harm us may someday see the truth, even if they never say it out loud. Her words weren't redemption, but they were real. And in a life filled with false smiles and empty apologies, sometimes real is all you need. I've learned that not every betrayal ends with vengeance. Some end with growth, some with stillness, and some, like mine, end with the quiet satisfaction of knowing they tried to take everything, but I never let them take me. These days, peace doesn't feel like a reward. It feels like home. Not the kind of home built from bricks and deeds, but the kind that lives in your chest, in the space where bitterness used to sit. I wake early, not because I have to, but because I want to. I make coffee without urgency. I water the plants in the back. I read the paper without checking my phone. My life, once dictated by everyone else's needs, now belongs to me. Sometimes I think about the boy I used to be, the one who thought being quiet meant being invisible. I wish I could go back and sit with him. Let him know that silence, when chosen, is a sacred kind of strength. That one day he wouldn't need to explain himself to anyone, that those who tried to erase him would fail, not because he fought back, but because he rose above. And I think of my grandfather often. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it mattered. He left me this land, not because I was loudest or most deserving by their standards, but because he saw something in me others missed. Consistency, patience, character. That's the inheritance they never understood. Not money, not walls, but the quiet, steady strength to carry a legacy without ever demanding to be seen. I've begun mentoring young men in the community. Some of them remind me of who I was, quiet, overlooked, unsure of their place. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need revenge to win. You just need to know who you are, and never give that away, no matter how loud the world gets. Every once in a while, I walk the perimeter of the property, especially at dusk, when the light is soft and forgiving. And I pause by the gate, the same one where Denise once stood, screaming for what she believed she was owed. All that noise, and now, nothing but wind and evening birdsong. That's what real victory sounds like. In the end, I didn't just keep the house. I kept my soul. and that was always the greater inheritance.